Tonight, we are honored to have Woullard Lett to talk to us about reparations. Woullard is a male co-chair of the Education Commission of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. That's NCOBRA. He is co-chair of the Educational Committee of the Manchester NAACP and is regional head of the New England region of the UUA. The title of his talk, Reparations, the Midpoint Between Truth and Reconciliation. I'm happy to welcome you, Woullard Lett.
Thank you, Pat, for that introduction. I want to extend my appreciation for your invitation for me to come join you and the other participants to have this discussion today. I am going to share my screen and launch right into the presentation. Okay, can you see that? Yes, great. The title of tonight's presentation is Reparations, the Midpoint Between Truth and Reconciliation. And I first heard that concept expressed by one of my colleagues, Dr. David Ragland, who is active with an organization called the Truth Telling Project and the Grassroots Reparations Campaign. And when he said it and we talked about it, I thought it was really apropos, and I thought it'd be appropriate for tonight's presentation. So when we talk about truth and reconciliation, what do we really, what does that mean? What does it look like? Generally, it takes the form of a governmental forum or commission. And there have been a number of truth and reconciliation commissions that have been authorized and put in place by governments around the country, including South Africa, which is probably the most well-known, Canada, Liberia, Brazil, South Korea. I listed just a few. So what is actually the purpose of truth and reconciliation process? And generally is defined as truth and reconciliation processes are started to allow for a open and honest accounting of past wrongdoing. And when we ask the question, okay, how effective has it been? We find that generally many of the commissions are limited to sort of a recitation of the problems or wrongdoings that have occurred in a particular area with particular people. But really what's most effective in terms of these commissions is when there is a more general approach to transforming society rather than looking at it from a transactional view and trying to go sort of tit for tat, wrong, right each particular wrong. So the question becomes, well, how do we move from truth to reconciliation? Is an apology enough? Is a confession and apology enough, and sharing the truth enough to move us to reconciliation? And I want to say that the term reparations has many different meanings in popular culture, but reparations fundamentally means repair. And when we're talking about reparations, we're not talking about revenge, we're talking about repair. A great African philosopher, anti-colonial freedom fighter, Amilcar Cabral once said in the early 60s regarding the struggle in Guinea-Bissau, always bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas, for the things in anyone's head. They're fighting to win material benefits, to live better and in peace, to see their lives go forward and to guarantee the future of their children. And the same is true with reparations. Reparations is not about a concept or an idea or, oh, okay, I was mixed up. Now I'm clear about what's going on, so everything is okay. But reparations is really talking about changing the material reality that we all inhabit and that we all share. So I contend that the midpoint between truth and reconciliation is reparations, that we can't, even with a confession of a wrong, we can't really fully reconcile until there is repair. So again, I can't stress enough, and that reparations means repair. Too often in general society, because of the culture and the society that we live in, which is really low context, when we think about oftentimes in the popular culture, talk about reparations, we actually usually end up focusing on compensation and compensation only. But one of the points that the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America makes is that when we talk about reparations, we're talking about full repair. So when we say full repair, well, what is this reparations movement about anyway? Well, we define reparations as a moral crusade. Reparations is a crusade that is attempting to address the crime against humanity of African chattel slavery. In 2001, the UN held the World Conference Against Racism and Xenophobia conference, and I believe it was Durban, South Africa. And during that conference, the UN declared the transatlantic chattel enslavement system as a crime against humanity. And crimes against humanity do not have no statute of limitations. But it's also, reparations is also, particularly in the context of the African chattel slavery reparations movement here in the US, it's also an ethical issue and an attempt to both acknowledge and address the dehumanization of the African personality and the European imagination that was so important for Europeans to treat people as property. They had to dehumanize them, and they had to figure out a way of carrying that forward generation to generation and being comfortable with that. As we think about reparations, one of the things that I think we need to do is to situate it in history and in material culture. And the reparations movement started many years ago. Reparations was about repairing this broken relationship that existed between Europeans and Africans. And we see attempts at righting these wrongs in the struggles and the insurrections and uprisings by people like Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Harriet Tubman is another person who is held up as an ancestor for her struggles in that regard. There are also Europeans who joined this crusade, and generally they're referred to as abolitionists. We have people like the Quakers, William Lloyd Garrison, who was, I believe he was a Unitarian, John Brown and many others. So for many people though, they raise the question, well, why are reparations needed? I mean, if we're talking about African chattel enslavement, that ended a long time ago. And the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America identifies 5 injury areas. And those injury areas are peoplehood or nationhood. One of the things that happened with Africans who were kidnapped and enslaved in this country, their culture, their language, their opportunity to express themselves in the way that they, had developed in their own culture, that was destroyed and replaced. Their religion, their rituals. African people during African chattel enslavement were denied even the opportunity to do things like marry, other kinds of just basic human and social, conditions and systems were denied them and intentionally stripped and blocked. Another injury area is wealth and poverty. Many of you may be familiar or have heard about the wealth gap between people of African descent and people of European descent. Much of that wealth gap started with the deprivation of African people of the value of their labor, during enslavement. and continued after the end of slavery with, Douglas Blackman wrote the book that talked about how after African child enslavement ended, there were attempts, there were laws that were passed, particularly in the South, that allowed for the labor of people of African descent to be stolen, whether through convict leasing. There's these things called black codes. So there are a lot of systems, institutional processes that were put in place that didn't require individual initiative or intent to bring this outcome of extracting and denying African people the value of their labor. Also, it was a couple of years ago, within the last 5 years, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston did a study of the median income in the Boston area. And not the median income, I think it was a median wealth, median assets held by people in the Boston area. And they said people of European descent, the median was about 200,000. And for people of African descent, it was $8. That's pretty shocking, but it's real. Another injury area is capital punishment and criminal punishment, actually, not capital, but criminal punishment, because for African people, the law enforcement, corrections, the court systems were not created to provide justice for African people. It was not it wasn't designed to serve and protect them, but to command and control them. And so this system for people of African descent is not a criminal justice system, it's a criminal punishment system. And right here in New Hampshire, based on the 2010 census data, the population, the percentage of the population of New Hampshire that was of African descent was estimated at 1%. But the percentage of prisoners, inmates in prisons and jails in New Hampshire was 7% of that incarcerated population. Just another example of disparities that have continued, from the period of enslavement on through and up until today. Education. Many of you may be familiar with Brown versus the Board of Education decision that came in 1955, and it's like, hey, Brown versus the board was here. What's the problem? But the problem with education for people of African descent is that it's twofold. One, the access to education and educational materials up even until today there's been a differential process where people of African descent are not receiving equal and oftentimes equitable support around the issue of education. Also, oftentimes they're subjected to miseducation. We have something called Black History Month here in America, but Black history is American history. There is no separation, and the process of separating it is a holdover from this way of separating the human family that was grounded in the African child enslavement system. Also, many of you who are probably on this call who are college educated, and really accomplishing your professional careers, many of you would be shocked to know that there's no such thing as white people or Black people. White people, that has no scientific basis. It has a social basis because there are policies and practices that were put together to enforce certain kinds of privilege and punishment. But our educational system totally, misses that point. Also, when we look at discipline in schools, we find a disproportionate punishment for children of African descent. And while many people, even people of African descent, talk about education as a great equalizer for American society, in fact, you know, it's been found that education doesn't create opportunity, wealth creates opportunity. And wealth is one of the things that's been denied people of African descent. When we look at health, we find a disproportionate number of people of African descent without health insurance. And that, you know, when we talk about health, we got to focus both on physical and mental health. I mean, when we look historically at health and the health system here in America, there's a gentleman, some of you may be familiar with, Dr. James Marion, who was considered the father of gynecology, but he got that moniker by carrying out these horrible experiments on enslaved African women without, often and usually without anesthesia. You know, so from this torture of African women, he was able to come up with these surgical procedures that earned him that moniker. Also, many of you have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study, where they talked about how, you know, men of African descent who were infected with syphilis were enrolled in a program that supposedly was treating them, but actually was not, and was monitoring the impact that syphilis took as it ravaged the body of these people, almost 400 men. And this is not a long time ago. We're not talking about, you know, 1772 or 1872. That study just ended in 1972. So those are some of the injuries that reparations are designed to repair. And well, how does that happen? You know, what are the ways that we can repair these injuries? Well, the United Nations identified 5 forms of reparations. And these 5 forms collectively constitute full repair. There's restitution, meaning restore the people to their former status. Rehabilitation, address the physical and mental injuries that have been inflicted upon them. Compensation, that's the thing that we hear about most often, which is to deal with monetary loss and whether it's lost opportunity or actual loss. Cessation is the demand that we stop the attack, you know, and the actions that are causing the injuries, with a guarantee that they won't be repeated. You know, too many times we see in American society, I think there were about 5 civil rights acts. You know, every time there's a step forward in American society when it comes to people of African descent, we see 2 steps back, that kind of thing. And finally, satisfaction. And satisfaction means meeting the needs of the injured party in a way that is acceptable to them. We can't let the, you know, the criminal decide what is sufficient to account for the crime. We can't allow the fox to tell the hens, you know, what's adequate compensation or what's satisfactory treatment. So as we look at the 5 injury areas and the 5 forms of repair, we can do a little bit of a matchup. So when we're looking at peoplehood, nationhood, and the destruction that was wrought on people of African descent from their entanglement and being engaged in this African chattel enslavement system, restitution can serve to work towards correcting some of those things. And also, another injury area is education. And one of the ways that we can address the issue of education is through satisfaction and looking at the verification of the facts and the truth part of the truth and reconciliation process. It requires us to address this issue of education that oftentimes identifies policy decision impacts as a result of personal deficiency outcomes. And so that's a really important part. Another injury area is health. We talk about physical health, we talk about mental health. And, you know, in terms of addressing the health issue, rehabilitation is the form of reparations required for repair. But not only just medical treatment for physical injuries, but also we have to deal with the impact of the range of problems that occur, even the psychological or mental impact of the terroristic behavior in American society that has continued since prior to 1619 when it comes to people of African descent, and it manifests itself as epigenetic transgenerational transfer of trauma. Another injury is the criminal punishment area, and that is addressed through the cessation and guarantee of non-repeat form of reparation, which includes educating and holding accountable public servants and the various institutions in society for fair and equitable treatment. And the wealth and poverty issue or injury area is dealt with by the compensation. So, well, okay, so those are the, that's what happened and that's how we can correct it. Well, how do we go about that? Well, the actors that are responsible for making some of this happen are institutional actors. Individuals can be involved, and individuals, it's required that individuals take action and take steps, but those individual actions must influence institutional responses. And when we look at institutional players like government, government, both state, federal, and local government, has been party to a number of behaviors and challenges that has resulted in the problems that we see associated with with reparations and the injury areas that people of African descent have suffered. Everything from sundown towns to these codicils that were in deeds that limited selling of property, and at the federal level, we've had everything from the Fugitive Slave Act to other kinds of behavior, and also overlooking offenses. So in government, that's one area today where we can make a difference, where at the federal level, the House of Representatives last year introduced legislation called HR 40, the House Resolution 40, which was to establish a commission to bring together a panel of experts to study the impact of the vestiges of the African chattel enslavement system on people of African descent today, and to offer recommendations for remedies. And in the Senate, the Senate introduced a companion bill that was the same as the House bill, HR 40, which is Senate Bill 1083. That's one way that we can do something about that in with institutional government today. Corporations, we say that the fruit from the poison tree is poison. So, we have many corporations today that are doing very well and that can trace their lineage back to a period of, back to the period of African chattel enslavement. And in cities and states across the country, we have things like slavery disclosure ordinances where companies that are doing business with cities and in other government organizations are required to disclose their, their involvement, if they have any historical involvement, as a successor corporation to businesses that benefited from, African chattel slavery. Schools and universities. Schools and universities have a big part in creating the problem, and they also can have a significant role in solving the problem. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation. There's a lot of, we need a truth commission because the colleges and universities aren't providing the truth that we need. If we're saying that, our colleges and universities are providing us with knowledge and information and, the things that we need to make a society, and then what we're actually, the reason that we have to ask for this separate entity is because the colleges and universities are failing in carrying out their mission of educating our citizens. Churches and religious institutions also, as an institution, bears some responsibility for both past wrongs and continuing challenges that we see faced by people of African descent. We have situations like Georgetown 242, with Georgetown University was founded by the Jesuits, the Jesuit Catholic order, and when it was facing some trouble, financial trouble as an educational institution, it had enslaved several hundred Africans in Maryland, and they sold those Africans down the river to Louisiana, in the New Orleans area, to fund and to rescue Georgetown University from financial ruin. It's just one example. But also, so it's important for us to admit that the religious institutions were complicit in this larger societal practice of African child enslavement. And there are things that religious groups can do. We see one example here today where the Unitarian Universalist Association, through its Commission on Institutional Change, has issued a report called Widening the Circle of Concern that addresses this exact thing. So finally, well, almost finally, but and wrapping up, let me just restate that reparations means repair. It's not about revenge, it's about repair. It's about repairing society. And it means that, like when you're in an abusive relationship and the person comes out of the room with a black eye and a broken arm, you don't just put makeup under the eye and a splint on the arm and send them back in for more harm. You deal with the abused and you deal with the abuser. And so that's what reparation is, repairing society. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Woullard. His words have made clear that reparations is viewed as a system of repair and restoration. And there is some contentious feeling about how to accomplish that. And maybe some of your questions will bring up some of your concerns about it. But there's another perspective that we're going to listen to, and that's Nancy Winterbottom. She will talk about reparations as a spiritual journey. Nancy is a volunteer with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire and is active in the Racial Unity Team. Welcome, Nancy.
I'm Nancy, and good evening to everyone. Sorry I can't see all of you, but I would like to extend a great thanks also to Woullard and to Pat and We the People for organizing this event. We're all here together to learn about reparations, or giving back, as Woullard has so carefully explained. As a privileged white woman living in a systemically racist country and culture, one of my goals as a social justice activist is to help bring about justice for Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples. It's a tall order, but I know we can do it. I am a woman of faith. I am a reparationist. As Pat just mentioned, talk of reparations often sparks conversation. No longer is the discussion about a one-time payout to Blacks and others victimized by skin color, but rather about collective healing. My calling to this effort began when, as a young woman, I craved the opportunity to be around Black and Brown people who I perceived and still perceive as beautiful, smart, spirited, spiritual, resourceful, and eager to smile and dance. I'm not sure to this day of the source of this calling, but it has been clear and consistent for many years. Through my studies and career, I have learned about the heinous atrocities of racism. While the purpose of my work here now is not only to acknowledge some of the horrors of what we white people have done to people of color, to encourage all of us here this evening to try to find solidarity with those who may seem very different than us as privileged white people. I have evolved to believe that our society desperately needs the healing, the connection, and the accountability that reparative can offer. First, the healing we must facilitate and learn ourselves is a knowledge of Black history. Any effort to work in race equity requires knowledge of and compassion for Black history. Facing that history is painful, indeed anguishing. As a white American woman, I feel embarrassment and shame. It has been difficult to face the reality that I am at least partially responsible for the legacy of slavery that constantly impacts Black people. It is not only them, but we who make housing and employment discrimination, economic inequality, and spiritual conditions very difficult for Black and brown people. In the words of Rabbi Ruth Slotnick of Temple Beth Am in Washington, New Jersey, quote, "We avert our eyes from the terror that's been inflicted on millions of African Americans. We're sickened to realize that we're safe by virtue of our skin pigmentation. For some of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we resist the truth because to accept it means we'll need to shift the status quo and make substantial sacrifices. And many other white people are paralyzed by the knowledge that the full damage caused by slavery and segregation, mass incarceration, and police brutality will never be rectified." To delve, for example, into one of those issues, and Woullard talked about some of these items, so some of this is repeat, but we think it's important, so we're going to repeat some of this. So talking about the justice system, with more than 1 million people detained in jails and prisons, we have the highest rate of incarceration in the world, a rate which increased 500% in the last 50 years. Many assert that possibly as many as 482,000 people currently held in local jails are there simply because they're unable to pay bail. They haven't even been convicted of a crime. African Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people, and Black men have a 1 in 3 chance of being imprisoned at some point in their lives. In America today, there are more young Black men in prison than in college. A few salient observations about economic justice. Emancipation did not bring economic freedom to former slaves. Discriminatory business policies kept white people economically ahead. So-called Black codes were enacted to stop African Americans from owning their own businesses. As a result of these and other unfair practices, African Americans have not been able to get a foothold in the economy. The income gap has not budged since 1970. For every dollar of assets white households have, Black households have a dime. According to some economists, the net worth of a white-skinned family was $247,000 in 2018. The average net worth of a Black-skinned family was $8. This shocking disparity isn't because the Black-skinned person is less smart or less ambitious than the white-skinned woman or man. Rather, it is the result of a sophisticated system deliberately designed to keep people of color down for over 400 years. When white people stole Africans to support the white economy through the sale of cotton, they chained them to galleys where they were forced to row themselves across the ocean. About half of Africans died from the terrible crossing, and when they did, their bodies were simply tossed overboard. Many of these ships and crews originated in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, by the way. New Hampshire and Maine prospered from the slave trade. 2 Americas, one for the white, a land of opportunity and financial gain, and one for the Black, a land of chains and beatings, backbreaking work, rape, and murder. Black people had nothing, not even their own names, not even a family. On and on, one injustice after another. redlining, segregated schools, so-called New Deal, Social Security that excluded farm workers and domestics, the two primary occupations Blacks dominated. We owe a debt to the descendants of those we enslaved. Enslaved Africans made us the wealthy, powerful country we have become. But how do we pay back that debt, and why us? We owe because if we are white in this culture, we have benefited and continue to benefit from policies and practices that promote white privilege. It is the privilege, for example, to know that we will not be pulled over by the police just because of the color of our skin. To know that we have never been denied service at a restaurant or Airbnb just because we are white. We owe because even today, we are complicit in keeping Black women and men down. The truth is, we are all complicit. We have benefited from an unjust and racist system, and it is time to be leaders who acknowledge our debt and make reparations. It is often said that slavery is America's original sin. This orientation either erases the First Nations people or starts American history at the Revolution, thereby obfuscating much of our settler colonial origins. It also sets our understanding of America in a Eurocentric lens of Christian redemption and repentance. It would be more useful to say that slavery is the foundation upon which we built the very idea of America and exploitation. And that's a whole nother story. Alas, though, there are a number of things we can do to bring our friends, families, and colleagues to the conversation. There are personal and societal actions we can take. I am not advocating that we wallow in guilt or shame, but I am suggesting that some of these actions will fit into our conscience and consciousness. The overarching goal must, through M4BL, which Pat remembered at the beginning, is to dismantle white supremacy. Divesting from ideas of patriarchy and addressing toxic masculinity to organize white people from a place of love, collaboration, and resilience. Organizing white folks to counter the growing white nationalist and counter-revolutionary backlash is critical. On a less heavy note, a couple of actions from the following list. Establish or join a group in town worship whose purpose is to educate ourselves about reparations and to take action to promote racial and economic equality. Learn about your local NAACP chapter. Go to a meeting, bring a friend. Attend lectures, movies, and events concerning people of color. Read Black literature. Watch Black movies. Say I'm sorry once in a while, context depending. Join and give to the Portland Black History Trail, the Portsmouth, New Hampshire Black Heritage Trail, the Portland Abyssinian Church, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the United Negro College Fund, the Equal Justice Initiative. There are many, many, many opportunities. Ask your college or university, alma mater, or your employer about their policies on reparations. Brown University, Georgetown University, Princeton School of Theology, Virginia Theological, and other colleges and universities have acknowledged their slave-owning history and identified descendants of slaves to receive financial support for their education. Ask for their models. Query your state and local officials about revising school curricula to include history of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, especially in K-12 education. Become familiar with HR and the supporting legislation in the US Congress to fund a commission to study and develop reparation proposals. Encourage your local and state representatives to stand up for reparations. Building a new identity based on love and radical inclusion. one that will survive the dismantling of white supremacy and therefore whiteness, is hard work. As spiritual seekers and leaders, with hope and hard work, we have a chance. Hope is what keeps people all across the world in our own community, rolling up our sleeves, seeking common solutions, building bridges, showing that a different, better way of being is possible. For decades, white America has exploited Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples' resources, minds, bodies, and labor. It is time to give back, to repair. Making reparations is a spiritual practice. It's not just about writing checks. Everybody, this is a quote from John Lewis, everybody needs to address the challenge of reparations. Together we can redeem the soul of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Nancy and Woullard both. You've seen how complex the problem is. You've also seen the hope there is in facing this problem. There are things that we can do that Nancy talked about. Before we open this up to questions from all of you, and when you have them, you may want to indicate to which person you are addressing this. I would just like to make one comment. HR 40 or SB, I forgot what the number is in the Senate. The bill that—
1083.
Okay.
SB 1083.
Okay. Will establish a commission to make a study of reparations. It has been revised. It was introduced first in 1987 and it's been reintroduced several times. One action everybody who's watching could take is this. Of the New Hampshire delegation in Washington, only Annie Custer has signed on as a co-sponsor of that bill. We have 2 senators and another representative. You could get in touch with them and say, support as a co-sponsor HR 40. I urge you to do that. And now let's open this bill. I think you can help manage this. And people who have questions can go in, as he told you, to raise your hand, go into the, and indicate what your questions are and to whom they're directed.
There are too many of you to be able to see you raise your hand in your little picture. So please use the electronic way to raise your hand. You'll find it on the participants screen when you pop up that little white box of participants. And we have a question from Lindsay, and I'm going to ask her to unmute herself.
Hi, thank you. My question is for Woullard. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I am a historian. I can't come from Richmond, Virginia, and I was actually born in Henrico County, the same county where Gabriel Prosser lived on Brookfield Plantation and led his rebellion, or planned his rebellion that didn't really end up happening. My question is really about the role and responsibility of primary and secondary education when it comes to dismantling this lost cause, false historical narrative, and also like the Virginia Textbook Commission, the Daughters of the Confederacy, and this sort of this whole old idea of the loyal enslaved people that I was taught in primary and secondary education, and then in college later learned about Gabriel Prosser. I was born 12 miles from where that happened and did not learn about it until I was 20 years old at Virginia Commonwealth University. So my question is really like, what is the role or responsibility that you see for the K through 12 in sort of changing this and repairing or preparing the erasure of Black history?
Lindsay, thank you for that question. Yes, I see, your question makes me think about a sociological experiment that was conducted by Mamie and Kenneth Clark as part of the 1955 Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court case. And this experiment is called the doll test, where Mamie and Kenneth Clark took these 4- and 5-year-olds, preschoolers, and presented to them a doll, a plastic molded doll, the same doll, but one was molded out of pink plastic and one was molded out of brown plastic. And they asked these children to make value judgments, not observations of fact, but value judgments. And they said, which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the good doll? Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the ugly doll? They're the same doll, just different color plastic. And these children made these value judgments that are consistent with the larger values held in by society. So I think that one of the challenges that we face with education is based in the culture that we live in. We live in a European culture that's binary and low context. And so, it's like, what do we need to, we think about it and we think, well, what are the educational processes that we need for the educational institutions to teach our children? But the first teachers are the mothers. The first classroom is the home, And so we have to figure out a way, one, how do we deal with the textbooks to remove, information that's incorrect, to include information that's excluded and overlooked. But we also have to take this larger societal view and think about, what is the, what are we feeding, ourselves as a society through the general culture. So yes, there are, things that we need to do and can do. And in fact, just recently, I was contacted by the Concord, New Hampshire school district asking asking for assistance, and through my role with the NAACP, asking for assistance in identifying someone to review their curriculum. And Manchester School District just this year put together a plan to end what's generally called tracking. They call leveling, the tracking, where they track students. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but there are, there are any number of different things that can happen, and it requires us all as a society to make those changes, because the school books that you read, when you were in K through 12, they were approved by a school board that included citizens and others. And so, I think that one of the things we have to do is to begin in a home, where we have to begin with children when they're younger, and it requires us to be civically engaged and to make the change. And I'll stop there. I'm sure there are other questions.
Are there other questions?
Here's a question from Bob Winterbottom. Bob, unmute yourself, please.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted, and let me start the video as well. Well, thanks very much to the two speakers. I know one particularly well, my older sister, if you indulge me. And Woullard, it's very nice to meet you this way and to hear what both of you had to say. And thanks again to organizing. I must just say, I've heard Nancy's talk about this, but I never really realized how much reparations is so much more than just, some court or some commission sorting out, what's an appropriate payment, or because clearly when I thought about that, this is a debt that can never be paid. There's no amounts of money that'll ever just repair. So I really appreciate that there are a lot of practical, hopeful things that can be done by individuals. But my thought was that, that's a good start. But, and even, if that leads to action on a broader and more significant scale by some of the actors that Woullard spoke about, the churches and schools and government and corporations and so on, that, are we really going to get there? It seems like there's a big risk that we'll come up short, fundamentally because it's not just about accelerating the repairs, but it's that broader social transformation that has to happen and then including a lot of stopping and reversing the ongoing wrongdoing that continues this day. It's just embedded in the way our society is, the way our economy functions. And so there's just such a deep, deep level of reform and transformation that needs to happen. It's just, I'm just wondering, how do we, is there some big strategy that can come out of these commissions and studies, or just, it seems like it's going to take such a comprehensive effort that'll blur into so many areas. It's on a par with, just dealing with climate change. It just doesn't stop the kinds of things that need to happen and the urgency with which they happen, because we're just suffering every day that things continue without a big change. Thank you.
I think that question was for you, Nancy.
No. Oh, because we have to pray and we have to trust, and goodness, what's happened up till this very moment, literally in this week of difficulty. It's a huge project and a huge problem, but I believe in the spiritual dimension for me comes into praying and having confidence and spending our limited resources, emotional as well as others, in sharing this information and talking with our neighbors and our friends and our family. And we just have to try. But really, Willie, you probably have.
Well, I'll make a couple. I don't have any greater wisdom than what Nancy Winterbottom has shared, but I will say though that there's an African proverb: "You eat an elephant one mouthful at a time." And so, what we're faced with and what we're charged with is to do something. Everybody can do something. There's some things that we can't do, and you're not responsible for what you can't do, but you are responsible for what you can do. We're all called to do exactly that, what we can do. It was mentioned that, everybody can call the legislator and urge them to support this federal legislation, HR 40 and S 1083, Senate Bill 1083. But those are small steps. And the way that we get to where we're going, to where we want to go, is to take those small steps and others, and we move forward towards the goal. Because doing nothing, doing nothing, you can't change anything if you don't do something. And so what we're being called to do, I think, and the response to your question, Mr. Winterbottom, is that, everybody has to do what they can do. And it's not it's not an eloquent answer, and there aren't any sort of big, there's no silver bullet, because part of the challenge is that much of what we need to change is this insidious, everyday sort of accepted, kind of go along with how things are, and that's the way they've always been. So we have to, each of us has to start looking at, examining our own selves and deciding, well, I can't do that, but I can do this, and begin to take action. Thank you.
Our next question is from Betty Lane. Betty, can you please mute yourself? Good.
This is really not a question, it's sort of an answer to the question was just asked. And this sort of reiterates what Nancy said, is educate yourself. There, the New Hampshire Black Heritage Trail, and this year with COVID, people don't have to be in the Portsmouth area to participate in those activities because they're all virtual. Join your local NAACP, get involved there. Read. This is a time when many of us of my age with gray hair are staying home. There are lots of things that can be read. White Fragility, Waking Up White, The New Jim Crow, and these are also often available in your library. So educate yourself and get involved. And as was said, call your congressmen and congresspeople and representatives about the legislation in the Congress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Donna C. has a question or comment. Donna, unmute. Good.
Yes, thank you so much, both of you, the presentations. A lot to think about. A question I think directed to Woullard is, so I really appreciated the breakdown that you made. And for me, it felt very concrete. It was tied very clearly to wrongs that can readily be confirmed and identified. It's still obviously very high level in that conversation, but it really it made such complete sense to me, and I feel like I could have a much better conversation about this going forward. So thank you for that. And I'm wondering, when we talk about having a commission, and which part of me, it sounds immediately discouraging to start talking about, let's have another, let's make a,
Let's stay
so I imagine that's probably doesn't always generate lots of hopeful feelings to hear that, but is when I based on what you understand nationally, and of course you have that material that you presented, I don't know what your sources were, is what you presented a really sort of core and common set of language and perspective among the leadership of this kind of conversation? So in other words, if we had a commission and you brought in 50 people from around the country that are like the top people who have been talking about this, are they, a lot of them, on a very similar page around this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that increasingly so. The National Coalition of Blacks, Reparations in America, has been on the vanguard of the reparations movement and the contemporary reparations movement. There are others, but in the consciousness of popular culture, when you say reparations, two things pop up. One, compensation, but the other is revenge. And so we have an educational process that we have to engage in, and that's part of the reason why I'm here tonight on this webinar. But increasingly, the language is being adopted as people are being exposed to it. For a long time, because of any number of reasons, the inclusion of the United Nations, the international definition of reparations, and the 5 forms wasn't part of the dialogue. And now, as we talk about that more, I think that we will hear more of it, and we are seeing more of it. Not everybody's there yet, but we're moving. And so, and there are any number of different kind of people have different ideas, but we're moving in, I think, in a similar direction.
Yeah, I felt like, because I agree, when I think about a defensive white person, it's, where are we supposed to get that money? Because you're thinking you're just gonna hand out checks, and who do you give it to? It's not like there's any, former slaves, quote unquote, the kind of garbage that people would say. And then there's probably an internalized fear, and that concept of, they're trying to get revenge against. And so it feels, but when you talked about it in its most simple form, what you said, I'm thinking, oh, reparations. Reparations is repairing and then not letting it happen again. And neither one of those two things have anything to do with, money directly to somebody, cutting a particular check to a particular individual, or, and don't have anything to do with revenge. So again, thank you very much for that information.
I have 2 written questions, both from Carol. The first one I think is for Pat. Can we get emailed copies of these presentations for use in letters to the editor, please, to senators and Congress?
The answer is yes, if you mean information about HR 40. Is that what you're asking?
Actually from Nancy, Nancy's presentation had so many wonderful things in it, as did Willard's, but to use for our personal persuasive letters or whatever we're going to do. That's thing one.
Yes, I can forward to you the actions you can take, which.
Excellent. The actions especially, exactly.
Yes. I also would like to point out that there are some groups in nearby areas, community discussion groups that are developing around the topic of reparations. One I found was in Amherst. If you Google reparations discussion groups, you may find some, and they would be like Zoom conversations right now until times change and we can get together. But there are numerous groups that are forming. People are becoming very much interested at the local level. The word is spreading.
I have one other, if I may.
Go right ahead, Carol.
I recently led a discussion on the 1619 project with our Seacoast Active Retirement Association. To me, it was revolutionary. It was just so groundbreaking and such an important document. And I had a few negative people who claimed that the 1776 project was much more important and much more had much more truth in it than the 1619 project. Are you familiar with the 1619? The New York Times, they devoted a year ago, they devoted the entire Sunday Times section to at least, I think there were at least 100. Wilfred, you probably know this better than I do, I'm sure, that this was a Pulitzer Prize winning piece about the beginning of the country being in 1619 when the first slaves arrived here, as opposed to 1776.
An excellent project, but what is the 1776 project?
This is the anti-1619 project. So I'm looking for ways to refute, to object, and this was one of their ways of refuting this, and it was based on their fear of reparation demands. And this was, most of the people on this, even though it was Heritage Society driven, were Black. So this is something that everybody needs to be aware of, that this was really a horror. The other thing is, I'm deeply concerned and have been certainly for 4.5-5 years about the evangelical opposition to anything that we do right here.
Thank you
for obvious reasons.
Bill, I said, you think there are some more people who have hands up?
Yes, we have Miriam ready with a question and a couple more after her. Miriam, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello. I'm really excited that we're having this conversation. Thank you for bringing this conversation here. I think my question is around, it feels to me too like there's a federal level, there's a big picture level, but there's also an individual responsibility level. And I'm curious about how you all think about the relationship between those two, specifically when you're thinking about someone who I know personally, because of my whiteness, have generational wealth that's come to me very directly. And so I'm curious about how you think about what does it mean for individuals to be taking responsibility for some of this before we wait for a federal commission to come up with anything. And also, how do you be thoughtful about the way that we do give money so that it's not, again, sort of recreating all the same harmful oppressive dynamics, the way some nonprofits can be run by people who are not necessarily representative of the people we're trying to serve? Do you have comments about, organizations like Buy Black Debt, or some of the bail relief programs that are about paying bail for people who, like we heard, are being incarcerated even though they haven't been charged with any crime? So I'm just curious about how you think about individual responsibility and where are sort of good places for that money to go if we're thinking about where we should be giving away some of the money that we haven't really generationally earned.
Okay, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for the question, Miriam. I think it's really interesting how when the question comes around to the issue of reparations, people get really concerned about who's, who's deserving, the deserving and the undeserving. But, nobody really had that much to say when they passed the latest tax cuts. There was no discussion about, what was going to happen with the money when they did the bailout for the Great Recession. In fact, that was some of the criticism that they passed the money out and it ended up in people's bonus packages, So I think that part of what we, and also, while yes, individuals do have a responsibility, but we can't divorce it from the institutional responsibility. So it's not an either or, it's a both and it's got to be that all the time. And because of the society that we live in, because of its low context and binary cultural orientation, and there's this push when we, how we frame the world and we think about things, to think of it in this, this binary way. So yeah, there's a need for federal legislation, but there's also an opportunity for state legislation and even municipal legislation. Vermont and California did state legislation. I think maybe Wilmington, North Carolina, Evanston, Illinois, Providence, Rhode Island, and Chicago are looking at doing some kind of municipal legislation. So, and government is not separate from us, it is us. So, part of what we have to do is to use our resources, both financial as well as political, to move, to live out our values, and to move these institutions that claim to represent us in the direction, in a way that that serves us. The larger question, I'm laughing because I'm with one of the reparations groups that I work with. They're focusing on this, I think it was Michael Dyson who talked about the individual reparations accounts. Like, oh, individuals need to be responsible and open up. And I spent a lot of my time pushing back against that, saying that, there are institutions, there are corporations, there's government, there are these larger, because larger institutions that we have to impact and influence to create the kind of social outcomes that we want. Because when you deal with this as an individual, then you're dealing with charity. And this is not about charity, this is about change. This is about justice. It's not, it's not about, oh, well, I saw somewhere some well-meaning people were saying, yes, individuals need to be, need to be responsible. And so if you have extra air miles, contribute your air miles, I mean, the problem and the challenge is that, extra air miles or even a $500,000 check would probably not have been a shield that would have protected Breonna Taylor, that would have protected Ahmaud Arbery, that would have protected Jacob Blake, who was just shot 7 times in the back, where the police claimed he was, it did it in self-defense. That would have protected Amadou Diallo. We can go down the list. And so, it's while financial resources are important, they're part, and so there are other things, there are many things that individuals can do. And part of the challenge is that we live in this society that affects all of us. And based on our social location, institutions are self-perpetuating. And when you contribute to their perpetuation, they reward you. And when you threaten their existence, they punish you. And so you can have people who consider themselves Black who are saying, oh no, we believe what these other people believe, because they're like playing out their self-interest. So we gotta rethink. It was our friend Albert Einstein who said, you can't solve a problem at the same level of thinking that created it. So we gotta, we gotta lift this problem up, and we gotta approach it and be creative and look at possibilities and think about, well, what are the new ways of doing things? Because if we continue in the old ways, we'll end up with the old, the same old results. That's not that's not a transactional answer. Oh, go do this, but what the answer is, can't be transactional. It has to be transformational. So those people with wealth who, have inherited wealth, part of the question you ask is, well, how do you know where to give, the money or who to give it to? A large part of the challenge that we face is that many people believe that the problems that impact people of African descent are human capital problems. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough education. They, they don't have the right values. And really, it's a social capital problem. So the thing is that if you're interested in giving money, then you need to develop relationships. Look locally at, the people that you know, talk to the people that you know from the affected communities and find out from them, who are they working with? Who do they have, who do they think has legitimacy, look around in the community, in the neighborhood, and start building some of these relationships, because that's what's required in the long run. Nancy?
Well, I would just add yes to all of what you said. And I would call attention again, I think it was, I don't know the woman who was just speaking, but that list of, what can we do? There are some very specific items in there about who to talk to and about organizations that you can make an overture. And again, it's not that you have to give money, but maybe you can volunteer. I think what's really, really critical is that we use language and we start talking in ways that we've been talking tonight. And it's not just the mistaken textbooks, and it's not just the inability to know exactly where to put the money, but rather to have a conversation. And as I put in the paper, whether it's with a spiritual community or a justice community that you start yourself. I know the Race Unity team, for example, started probably 5 or 6 years ago, Pat, at least, and started out with a small number of people. And now people who come onto these programs are similar to today, 70, 80, 90 people. And that's because we've learned to talk and to acknowledge similar vocabulary and lexicon.
Bonnie is the next person who's been waiting at the microphone. Go ahead, Bonnie.
First of all, thank you, Pat, and thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Woullard. I don't have so much a question as gratitude for your sharing. And Nancy, particularly with white skin and emotion in terms of some of the things that you were recognizing that white people have done or have failed to do. That was very moving for me. To reiterate what several people have said, I recently heard an Oprah Winfrey interview with Sister Joan Chester, the nun on the bus, who basically said that what we need to do truly is to listen and speak up whenever we hear some things that are not conversant with how we believe, and to ask questions and to recognize that people are coming from different places. But unless we can speak together, we don't make large change. It isn't our elected officials, it is each one of us who has an obligation. And I think you emphasized that both in what you said, but it comes back to us and who we are, how we listen, and how we are willing to speak the truth as we see it. So thank you for this evening. I appreciate it.
Stephen, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. And again, sorry, it was not much of a question, but more of an aside or a helpful comment. Thank you all so much, Stephen, he, him. And so I loved what Woullard touched on, the notion of being both structural but also personal. And the one thing I have done within my practice in the work of anti-racism is like personal reparations. And that comes down to like, where the heck am I spending my money? The notion of like, there are Black establishments in New Hampshire, there's like distilleries, there's bookshops, there are coffee shops, there are a variety of options there. So being mindful of where your money is going. So like, oh, if you're buying a book, maybe don't use Amazon, but use a Black-owned business in DC, like Mahogany Books. And that this notion of reparations is both structural in changing the system itself that has been used to disenfranchise and kill Black and brown people of color, but also to look at the ways in which you, in your everyday life, can make a difference in the lives and livelihoods of for Black folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions in the,
Kate or Keith?
It's Keith.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, for speaking, and Woullard, thank you for your time. My question real quickly is, are there any organizations that you're familiar with that are working to elevate and put people of color and Black people in positions of power, elected officials and things like that, that we can look to support?
I am not deeply enmeshed in the electoral political, arena. I am sure that there are there, and in fact, most political organizations I know here in New Hampshire, there is the Democratic Party has an African American caucus headed by Jacqueline Weatherspoon. And I'm sure that there are national bodies around, and if you email me, I can put you in touch with some people. But off the top of my head, I can't like rattle off the list,
Emily's list comes to my mind, and it's not specifically for people of color and or whatever, Indigenous, but it is for promoting women and getting women involved in the political system. And it's been very highly successful. So as a model, for example, you might want to look at Emily's list and see what some of the things are, their strategies and what they're doing.
the NAACP. Check the NAACP. There are several organizations in the state, several affiliates. Check them out in terms of political activity. If you want an interesting political consideration, the State Board of Education in New Hampshire has some vacancies. Right now, there are only white people on it. And the governor is going to have to make some appointments soon. So if you want to have an influence on education and changing the look of education, you might want to contact the governor and the executive council and consider putting some pressure on to nominate people of color.
And I just want to say that in response to Keith's question, as a final comment that on it, is that what's really politicians, this is supposed to be a representative democracy, and what's really important is that we do, as we saw in Georgia, a week or so ago, that it's part of the great man theory of American society, where we kind of position, or and it also is part of the hierarchical nature of the way that we view the world, where we want to put somebody up on top to sort of take care of us, so to speak. And what's really more powerful, what we need is an engaged constituency. So probably we'll do better in actually see our values supported more by working at educating and engaging, civic engagement among the community at large, rather than focusing on identifying, rather than only focusing on identifying candidates, because it's both and. So thank you.
Please notice that there is a resource list in the chat. There's a link, a very extensive list of books and resources that may help you expand your understanding of this. I think our time is almost up. Are there any more questions before we?
We have one more person waiting with a hand up, and I have 3 questions, at least 2 of which are pretty quick questions that I'll read from the private chat. Ceci, why don't you unmute your mic and ask your question?
Mine's, it's not a question, it's a real quick comment. This was a personal experience and one of the most awkward and worthwhile I've ever had. My new son-in-law, I have a white daughter, and my new son-in-law is Black. And when I was getting to know him, I said, Micah, I know I'm going to say and do something racist or something that comes across as racist. God only knows when, how, or what, but I know I will. And I am counting on you to call me on it. And I just put it on the table because there was this awkwardness. I wasn't sure how to deal with a Black son-in-law. My other one's white, and actually I prefer Micah. He's more human. The other one's a robot. But he was awesome. And he said, I will. Cece, I absolutely will. And count on it. And we'll talk about it. So it was just this quick one-on-one, incredibly awkward moment that turned out to be marvelous. So there's that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Bob Moore asks the question, would it be worthwhile in an education system to educate students in a social studies or literature course to inform them what a sundown town is, especially if their town has a history of being a sundown town?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And there are lots of good resources, including a book called Sundown Town.
Well, speaking of resources, the other comments are about other resources. David Wheeler suggests Nancy should introduce the concept of joining New Hampshire Humanities and BHTNH to sign up to their mailing list to encourage their programs on Zoom, to meet the minority community and engage in the dialogue of meeting the truths of friendship, which these groups to join us all in community. And then Tanisha says, there is also the BLM-NE PAC, which is an organization trying to influence politics and bring in people of color. That's it for hands up and questions.
Thank you, Bill, for managing all of this. Thank you very much, Woullard and Nancy, for your presentations. And thank you all for joining in. We appreciate your following this, and we know we have a lot to learn on a very difficult topic. So I appreciate your attention and your joining us.